Good evening, everybody. It's great to see you tonight. Thanks for being here on this rainy Wednesday night. We appreciate your diligence very much. We're continuing our Old Testament survey in this Wednesday night class. We're in the book of Judges. Last week we talked about Abimelech. We were past him. We talked primarily about Jephthah last week. We talked about Jephthah in the famous episode with Jephthah's daughter. Following Jephthah, there were three judges mentioned really quickly without much information at all. Ibzan, Elon, and Abdon are mentioned. And that brings us to one of the best remembered of the judges, Samson. So we're in the book of Judges, and in chapter 13, we begin to read about Samson. Judges 13, verse 1, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. And there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. And the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold, now thou art barren and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son, and no razor shall come upon his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb, and he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And so we have this, seemed like a fairly common situation of a barren woman who was specifically blessed by the Lord. In this case, it was Manoah and his wife, and she's promised that she's going to bear a child. She's instructed not to drink wine or strong drink, not to eat any unclean thing, and that the child that she conceives, no razor will come upon his head. He shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. Now, this Nazarite situation, let's make sure we're clear on that. Some people confuse the Nazarite vow with the city of Nazareth, where Jesus grew up. They're not the same at all. They don't have anything, one doesn't have anything to do with the other. And so go back to Numbers chapter 6 to read about the Nazarite. Numbers chapter 6, begin reading in verse 2, if I can get my pages to turn there. Numbers 6, verse 2. Speak unto the children of Israel and say unto them, when either man or woman shall separate themselves to a vow of a Nazarite, to separate themselves unto the Lord, he shall separate himself from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar of wine or vinegar of strong drink. Neither shall he drink any liquor of grapes, nor eat moist grapes or dried. All the days of his separation shall he eat nothing that is made of the vine tree, from the kernels even to the husk. All the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head, until the days be fulfilled in which he separateth himself unto the Lord. He shall be holy, and shall let the locks of his hair of his head grow. And so there's the vow of the Nazarite. And this instruction to Manoah's wife was that the child that she would bear would begin to keep these principles of the Nazarite vow from the time he was born. From the womb, he would be a Nazarite. And so this was the special announcement of his birth, a promised child, and he would be special. And specifically there in verse 5, he would begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And so the Philistines at this point were the ones who were oppressing the Israelites. But remember, we've said this over and over again, all through the book of Judges, the people would do good for a while. Then, as it says there in verse 113, when the children of Israel did evil again. So they would do good for a while, then they would do evil. And when they did evil, God would let their enemies oppress them. In this case, the enemy oppressing them was the Philistines. And then after they would cry out because of their oppression, God would send a deliverer, a judge. And in this case, the judge is going to be Samson. All right, so it's kind of, and so of course he is born as promised. But Samson, not a great individual. The character of Samson really is curious. God uses him powerfully to accomplish his purposes. But Samson himself was a fellow who had a lot of issues. And when we get to chapter 14, skipping you down to chapter 14, in verse 1, Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now, therefore, get her for me to wife. Well, that already is not right? The Israelites are not supposed to marry out of Israel, right? They're not supposed to marry the people of the land. They're not supposed to give their daughters in marriage nor take their daughters in marriage. So this is already not appropriate. This is not what it ought to be. And the parents pushed back a little. I don't think they pushed back enough, but in verse 3, his father and his mother said to him, Is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? So they realize that this is not what it ought to be, and yet they go ahead and accommodate Samson in the doing of this. And so, verse 5, Then went Samson down, his father and his mother, to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or mother what he had done. So they're on their way in order to make arrangements for Samson to marry this Philistine woman. And on the way, a lion comes out, and Samson kills the lion with his bare hands. But he doesn't... we don't have any detail. Why wouldn't his parents have known that he did this or whatever? We're not told. But his parents were not knowledgeable of what had taken place. So they go down and they make the arrangements. Skip down to verse 8. After a time, he returned to take her. And he turned to, so they're on their way back now. So the arrangements have been made. Now they're down there to actually to acquire this wife for Samson. And in verse 8 it says, After a time he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands and went on eating, came to his father and mother, and he gave them, and they did eat, but he told them not that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion. So they go on to make the arrangements for the wedding. And Samson taunts the Philistines. Now remember, this situation between the Israelites and the Philistines is not good already, right? The Philistines are working over the Israelites. The Philistines are oppressing the Israelites. So there's already not a good relationship between them. So at the wedding, Samson says to them, verse 12, Samson said unto them, I will now put forth a riddle unto you, if you can certainly declare it to me within 7 days of the feast, and find it out, then I will give you 30 sheets and 30 changes of garments. But if you cannot declare it to me, then ye shall give me 30 sheets and 30 changes of garment. And they said to him, Put forth thy riddle, that we may hear it. And he said to them, Out of the eater came forth meat, and out of the strong came forth sweetness. And they could not in 3 days expound the riddle. So he poses a riddle to them about that lion. And then about the fact that the lion had a swarm of bees in the carcass, and that he took sweet honey out of this lion's carcass. So in verse 15 it says, It came to pass on the 7th day that they said to Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have you called us to take what we have? Is it not so? And so they can't solve the riddle. And so they go to Samson's wife, his newly married wife. This is still in the days of the wedding feast, and says, find out the solution to this riddle, or we're going to burn your house down. Well, that's a pretty serious threat, right? And you have to believe these kind of people who would do what they threatened to do. And so, because of that, Samson's wife comes and begs him for the answer to the riddle. Verse 17, she wept before him the 7 days while the feast lasted, and it came to pass on the seventh day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him, and she told the riddle to the children of her people. And the men of the city said to him on the seventh day before the sun went down, what is sweeter than honey, and what is stronger than a lion? This is the famous phrase. And he said unto them, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. That's the famous response of Samson. I warn you, husbands, do not refer to your wife as your heifer. That's just probably really good advice that you should take to heart. But Samson, if you had not plowed with my heifer, you had not found out my riddle. And the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he went down to Ashkelon, still in Philistia, part of the Philistine nation. He slew 30 men of them and took their spoil and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. And so the whole thing unravels here at this point, right? And so Samson pays off the obligation because they had solved the riddle, but they'd only solved the riddle because they threatened his wife. And so he goes and kills 30 Philistines, gets the spoil that he owes to these others, and gives it to them. But then he goes home, and he doesn't take his wife with him. And she is given to another man, okay? All right, so that leads to the next chapter, that he changes his mind. He decides to go back and get his wife. Chapter 15, verse 1, it came to pass within a while after, in the time of wheat harvest, that Samson visited his wife with a kid. And he said, I will go into my wife into the chamber. But her father would not suffer him to go in. And her father said, I verily thought that thou hadst utterly hated her. Therefore I gave her to thy companion. Is not her younger sister fairer than she? Take her, I pray thee, instead of her. And Samson said concerning them, now shall I be more blameless than the Philistines, though I do them a displeasure. And Samson went out and caught 300 foxes, and took firebrands, and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burned up both the shocks, also the standing corn, with the vineyards and the olives. And so you begin, well, you already should have. We begin to see the character of Samson. This guy, how would you refer to him? Probably an understatement. He's certainly a loose cannon here, right? That would probably be an understatement if you wanted to describe Samson. But I tell you cross him, and you will pay the price for crossing him. And so he burns up their fields and then the Philistines come back again. Verse 6. Then the Philistines said, who had done this? And they answered, Samson, the son-in-law of the Timnite, because he had taken his wife and given her to his companion. And the Philistines came up and burnt her and her father with fire. And Samson said unto them, though ye have done this, yet will I be avenged of you, and after that I will cease. And he smote them hip and thigh with a great slaughter, and he went down and dwelt in the top of the rock Etam. And the Philistines went up and pitched in Judah and spread themselves in Lehi. And the men of Judah said, why are you come up against us? And they answered, to bind Samson we are come up, and to do to him as he had done to us. So he slaughtered a bunch of Philistines, and he went back home, and the Philistines came after him, and the men of Judah said, why are you coming? And they said, we're coming to get Samson. And so they go to the men of Judah, his own people. Verse 11, the 3,000 men of Judah went to the top of the rock of Etam and said to Samson, knowest thou not that the Philistines are rulers over us? What is this thou hast done unto us? And he said unto them, as they did to me, so I have done to them. And they said, we are come down to bind thee, that we may deliver thee into the hand of the Philistines. And Samson said unto them, swear unto me that ye will not fall upon me yourselves. And they spake unto him, saying, no, but we will bind thee fast and deliver thee into their hand, and surely we will not kill thee. And they bound him with 2 new cords and brought him up to the rock, or brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and the cords that were upon his hands became as flax that is burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands, and he found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. And Samson said, with the jawbone of an ass, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of ass have I slain 1,000 men. All right. So here's this picture of Samson. And he's certainly causing a ton of grief to the Philistines. Remember, it was prophesied before his birth that he would begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And that part of the prophecy is coming true. He's certainly giving the Philistine tons of grief. But he personally, you have to say, this guy is way less than what you would think a godly man would be. He has an outrageous temper. He's very volatile. He's vengeful. He's mighty. He's powerful. He's incredibly strong. But he uses that strength to avenge himself personally. Again, we're saying that this is probably not the picture of a great person. Now, the reason I bring all of that up, because some of us were talking just recently in Hebrews chapter 11, where we read about all the great characters of faith in the Old Testament times. In Hebrews chapter 11, he is mentioned among some of those in verse 32. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 32, what shall I say more? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and of Barak and of Samson and of Jephthah, of David also, and Samuel and the prophets. So Samson is mentioned there in what we refer to as Faith's Hall of Fame, right? Samson's mentioned. Have you got any thoughts about that? Because we're seeing a picture of a guy here who's got lots of trouble. He's got a lot of problems. Well, any input on that? What are you thinking? James, I see you got a thought.
Yeah. So obviously he had faith at times in order to, later on it talks about stopping the mouth of the lion. So he had enough faith to believe in God where God would give him strength, and God will use good and bad people to accomplish his purposes, right? He used foreign enemies to do that as well. But he has problems, right? We all see the problems that he has. He let those overcome the good qualities that he had. He obviously had some good qualities because God used him, and it talks about the faith that he had to accomplish some of the things that he did. But that doesn't approve of all the things that he did.
That's right.
Against God's will.
I think that last point you made is really the point. The fact that these weaknesses, these personal character flaws are mentioned, they're not mentioned with commendation. They're just recorded for us. But as James said, God was able to use him to accomplish his purpose. His purpose was to deliver the Israelites from Philistine oppression. And God could use him to do that, even though he was a man with lots of flaws. Tom?
You know, it's almost like Samson knew that, I'm going to show the Israelites need to know that God is with them. So he tells them to bind him up and, don't kill him, but bind him up and deliver him to the Philistines. And it says there, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Evidently he knew that, the Spirit of the Lord would come with him. He had that faith.
And later, we'll read here in a minute with Delilah, he kept thinking that God would always do that.
Yeah. But, so it was like, it's almost like he got his brethren to bind him up so he could show to them that God was with him to deliver the Philistines to him. And so, he went in, bind him up, tie him up really tight, hog tie him. And they used nice new ropes. And it just, he just snapped them and took and slew all the Philistines that were there. The Israelites sort of had to, be from because it looked like it almost happened immediately. So,
yeah, they had to be impressed with what he did.
They had
if you think about that, so he just takes a bone of an animal, a jawbone of an ass. One man kills 1,000 men with wasn't even a true weapon, it was just a bone. You talk about a powerful man. This guy was incredibly powerful. Wayne, you have thought?
Yeah, we read this, and I'm not sure we get the behind the story of it. It seems like this is all kind of stuff he does off the cuff. But I think that combining this with the Hebrew epistle, I think this is him understanding what was prophesied about him, that he would deliver Israel from the Philistines. All of the violence that we see him commit is not against his own brother. It's against the Philistines. And I tend to think he has this idea that he is a deliverer of Israel, and he is acting on faith.
So when he attacks the Philistines, he views it as God's work, perhaps.
Yeah. Even though, he says, "Give me this woman because she looks good to me." It says that twice about him. So he's got a carnal nature to him, but he also, I think, understands his role, what God has expected of him, and he's fulfilling that role.
Okay.
And he does it until the end of his life.
Okay. All right. Wade?
Yeah, I agree with Wayne. I think the attacks are provoked because it seems like he's going into it with an idea that he's going to start some trouble. That's just the way I.
So he wants to take it out on the Philistines.
Yeah, he wants.
And he very well, I think you guys are probably right, that he sees it as a God-given mission to work over the Philistines. But, and I accept that, but I'm going to tell you, some of the other things are not overlookable. I mean, he's married a woman he's not supposed to marry. Real quickly, look at the first verses of chapter 16. It's just mentioned as another aside. Then went Samson to Gaza and saw there a harlot, went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson has come hither. And they compassed him in and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, in the morning when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay until midnight, and rose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city and 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of the hill as before Hebron. That just is sort of mentioned as an aside, but he's with a harlot. So again, I think you guys are right, and I'm not quibbling with your position at all, because I think it is correct. He was a chosen person to afflict the Philistines and to deliver the Israelites, and he's doing that. And he's going to do it in his death. He's going to do it even more than he did it in his life. But the thing to me that's troubling, and the thing that makes it a little hard to fully explain, in my mind at least, why he's included in Hebrews 11, is these other acts of immorality in his life. Christy?
Ate out of something unclean.
Okay. Touched and ate out of an unclean animal. We just read that in our daily Bible reading. John?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm not trying to jump too far ahead, but you mentioned at the end of his life. To me, I'm happy to chew on what Wayne says. To me, it seems like he had a purpose, but he had a lot of moral failures. But it seems to me at the end of his life, in chapter 16, verse 28, he called unto God to give me strength one more time. And then he took the pillars down, so he could take out these Philistines. He said, let me die with the Philistines. So to me,
So are you saying that maybe at the end of the life he made that all
I'm
right?
saying at the end, well, it seems like at the end of his life, he tried to turn back to God. And so maybe in my mind, I can say Hebrews 11 makes sense because he did a lot of wrong, but at the end of his life, he understood his purpose and tried to make it right.
I think that's fair. I accept that. Another thought? Wayne?
Just in passing, I think this is another hallmark of inspiration that we've been talking about in the past, that the flaws of the heroes that we see in the Old Testament are not hidden, they're prominent. Look at Peter. Peter was a liar. He was
A hypocrite?
A hypocrite, and he was worldly. He was with the apostles at the feet of the cross when they were saying, who's greatest in the kingdom of heaven? He denied the Lord, cursing and swearing. Is that somebody that's associated with the Lord?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. But so I think we can draw great satisfaction, or satisfaction is not really the right word.
Consolation.
comfort from the fact that we can be
We're not perfect.
people of God with flaws.
Yeah, not to excuse the flaws, but to know that God can use us and that we can be right with Him as we repent. Ben, you had thought?
Pretty much the same.
Yeah.
I think Hebrews 11 is not a list of perfect people.
There's not any perfect people in Hebrews 11.
Yeah, but people that had faith when it mattered most.
Yeah, I think that's what it said. Oh, wait.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying, but I sometimes think we have to be careful with that, because if we take the Quran and we look at I can't remember his name, the guy that's in the Quran.
Muhammad? Yeah.
Who marries the 6-year-old and consummates it at 9. You know, they may say the same thing. Well, yeah, he made some mistakes, but that could be inspiration, you know.
Yeah, I think the difference with Muhammad is that he's supposed to be like their savior. So we wouldn't contrast Muhammad with Samson. The contrast would be between Muhammad and Jesus, who was perfect. James?
And it's the law of God that's perfect, not these people, right? Islam and that law is imperfect. You can see it and read it, and that's the difference, right?
Yeah.
Not that we're not saying that what he's did was right. We're saying God can still use him, and he can still accomplish some of God's will when he has the faith that he needs. But it doesn't make the imperfect. It's still all those things that he does with women is wrong. It's completely wrong. We have excuses, and that's completely different than Muhammad teaching what we know is wrong and saying that's okay.
I think you're right. Ellen?
So he was chosen. An angel was sent to his mother, let her know that she was going to be having a baby. Angel was sent to Mary. An angel was also sent to, I think, Elizabeth's husband.
Yeah.
So God's plan.
I think that's right. And he is, before he was born, it was prophesied he will deliver Israel from the Philistines. And he's accomplishing that purpose. And so there's probably several ways to describe it. God uses less than perfect people to accomplish his will. Because if he can't use less than perfect people, his will will never get done. The only perfect person is Jesus, right? But having said that, I think it's still appropriate to point out these moral failings in Samson. I mean, he was pretty bad morally. James?
You see what happened in his life. At the end, he was humiliated. His eyes were gouged out. I mean, there's a lot of bad things that happened to him. We don't see, the other judges that didn't have as many of the failures that he had, right? We don't see all the problems that they dealt with because of those failures. We see him suffering, and I think it directly because of the choices that he made. Even though he can still accomplish his will, he's going to suffer. He's going to be humiliated. He's going to do all. I mean, I think God maybe punishes him for some of that behavior.
So I think that's a good point to make. So he accomplishes the purposes of God, but he suffers for his failings. I think that's a good observation. So, and I'm not going to take time to read all of chapter 16. I think you know the story very well about. Everybody has heard of Samson and Delilah, right? You talk to somebody who doesn't have any working knowledge of the Bible whatsoever. They know Samson and Delilah, right? And so that's in chapter 16. And so she's actually mentioned there in verse 4 is where the story begins. 16:4. Came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the Lord of the Philistines came to her and said, entice him, see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him, and we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. I don't know how many there were. I don't know how many lords of the Philistines there were that came to her. There were plural, and each of them was going to give her 1,100 pieces of silver. She was offered a lot of money. Entice him. Find out where his strength is. So she does that. She's a corrupt person. And so she begs him, and he tells, first time, he said, bind me with 7 green cords, and I won't be able to break out. she does. Of course, he immediately breaks out. Here's another thing I have some trouble dealing with Samson. Why doesn't he walk away from this situation like immediately? This woman is a betrayer. She's a bad person. He stays with her. The second time, he says, bind me with new ropes. I won't be able to break free. She tells them they do it, and yet he breaks free. The third time, he says, weave my hair into 7 locks. In other words, basically, I guess, tie him up with his own hair. And she does, and he breaks free again. Well, this is incredible, but she pressed, verse 16, I'm in 16:16. It came to pass when she pressed him daily with her words and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart. And he went on to say that his strength was with his hair, and if they cut his hair off, he wouldn't. But notice, so verse 19, she made him sleep upon her knees. She called for a man. She caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head, and she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. And so the reason why I guess the explanation is, why would he stay there and keep telling her these tales, is because he was super confident that he had this strength from the Lord, and no matter what they did, he would be able to prevail against them. This time, it didn't happen. Wade?
So does this ever come up in like the wives' sermon? You know, it came to pass when she pressed on his words daily.
I'm going to let you make that
And he vexed his soul to death.
But he's worn down. He's finally, and there is a takeaway lesson, I think, not necessarily husbands and wives, so much as if we're around bad people, they can eventually wear us down, and they will. And she did. And so he was taken. Verse 21, the Philistines took him, put out his eyes, brought him down to Gaza, bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Using him like an ox. And he just, you can just picture him walking around in a grinding mill, pulling with his, he has lost his main strength. He's just using him as like an animal, like you use an animal to grind grain. But verse 22 says the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines gathered themselves together to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice, for they said, our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. Notice, that's how they described Samson. So he was accomplishing what had been prophesied of it. This is the Philistines' own account. He's the destroyer of our country. He has slew many of us. So it came to pass when their hearts were merry that they said, call for Samson that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. And Samson said to the lad that held him by the hand, suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld, while Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand, the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords, upon the people that were there. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. And so Samson dies in this last act of strength, but also ultimately accomplishing his purpose to deliver the Israelites from the oppression of the Philistines. And he dies in the process of that. So, I don't know. The story of Samson is just a sort of a conflicted story in my mind. he does what God uses him. There's just no doubt that God uses him to accomplish his ultimate purpose. But the failings, the moral failings and the flaws of personal character and virtue are pretty stark. And so it's just one of those things. But I think, like Wayne said, every time we read these kind of stories, God can use anybody, even bad people. God can use anybody to ultimately accomplish purpose. And secondly, if this was a book written by men, why would they tell us these bad things about Samson? Why wouldn't you just have Samson as your like superhero? I mean, his strongest of all. Why do you tell his flaws? You wouldn't if this was written by men, they would not tell those flaws. Wade.
1520, and again in 1631, he says that he judged Israel 20 years. So in between all this things that he had done with the Philistines, he was actually judging Israel.
So we've got a handful of episodes that are enumerated, but he was in the position of judge for 20 years. So there's a lot of other things that we don't know, potential good that he did. Okay, that's an interesting point. Anything else here? Oh, Wayne.
Yeah, just one additional thing about his faith. If he was a man who did not operate by faith, who had no faith in God, although I think you say his flaws are pretty stark, pretty aggressive. But if he was a man that had no faith, he wouldn't have bothered. It would have been a whole lot easier for him to just go on in his life without any concept of God in his life, just do what he wanted to do. But he didn't do that. He constantly fought for 20 years. He constantly fought against the enemies of his people and eventually delivered them from their captivity.
Good. I think that's right. Landon.
The rest of the Israelites were obviously scared of the Philistines, and in every instance that we see Samson fight, it was by himself.
Yeah, he doesn't get any help, does he?
By himself.
So the Philistines really did have them afraid and oppressed, for sure. James, you have another thought?
Yeah, in 15 and verse 18, he does have faith in God, and even in the midst of, after the battle of killing the Philistines with the donkey, he's so overcome by thirst, he says, you have given me this great deliverance. So he gives credit to God and knows where it came from. And he says, you help me with my thirst, and God gives him water then by a miracle, right? Yeah. So we see he does have faith, and he must have had faith to do the things that he did. It's just unfortunate that he had such failings in his life that he paid prices for. I mean, they could have been avoided at the same time.
So I think that point that you're making there is the key. Remember what we said about Rahab. Rahab was a harlot, right? But she is also in Hebrews 11 and James chapter 4, James chapter 2. She is mentioned, let's see, where is that? It speaks of her in James chapter 2:25. Rahab the harlot was justified by works when she had received the messengers, sent them out another way. So why is Rahab, remember that story with Rahab, is she actually lied to protect the spies. So she was a bad person, and she, even in the act of protecting the spies, she told lies to get it done. But when we were talking about her, we said what she's commended for is her faith. And I think that's the same thing we would say about Samson. What Samson's commended for is his faith. He's not commended for his sinful conduct. He's commended for his faith. And I think that's got to be our sort of bottom line consideration. James?
I think he's influenced by the attitude of the people that lived during that time. At the very end of the book, it says, and there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. And he's impacted by that, right? He has great faith some of the time, but then he falls into the trap of doing what's right in his own eyes. He wants her because he thinks she looks good to him. And so he falls back into the attitude of the Israelites in general, and see how the nation, he's acting like a nation then. not like the faithful judge of God.
Yeah.
But then he gets back up and does good things again, but he's pulled back into the nation's behavior as a whole. That's their attitude at this point in time.
All right. That's right. Wayne?
You mentioned Rahab. Every mention of Rahab in Scripture, she is called the harlot.
Yeah.
Rahab the harlot. That's how she's known. And I can't explain even why in the New Testament that emphasis is given to her as a harlot after she, I'm assuming, left that profession as she followed the Israelites
Yeah.
and became part of the
She was even in the genealogy of Christ
Right.
before it's over, yeah.
What would you say is something justifies the act of suicide based on
Ooh, ouch. I don't know if you guys could hear Kelly's question. So, what about somebody that comes along and tries to justify committing suicide by using the story of Samson, because he effectively committed suicide in his final act of strength in killing the Philistines? I don't know. I haven't really thought about that. I think partially I would say this was not a direct act of suicide as much as it was a suicide mission. So if a soldier goes, we want you to go up that hill and attack that machine gun pillbox at the top of the hill. 20 men had died trying to get there, but we want you to go. And the guy said, I will go. And he goes. Maybe he makes it, maybe he doesn't. We call that a suicide mission, but we don't call that guy, we don't accuse him of having committed suicide. He takes on a horrible mission that will very likely end in his death. I would think this case of Samson is more in that mode than somebody who just outright kills himself. Wayne?
Yeah. God grants his request. He asked God if he would give him the strength to pull these pillars down and destroy all those people. But he asked God that he would take him at that time. And God is the one that granted it.
Yes, and I think, we regard people like that, we give them congressional medals of honor. People who, take on a mission, they end up dying, but in the course of it, they accomplish the deliverance of other people. So in answer to that, I think I would challenge the idea that this really fits the suicide picture. Wayne?
The aim is to kill yourself.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's not his goal. His aim was to kill as many Philistines as he could,
Yeah.
even if it cost him his life.
Yeah, I think that's right. Tom?
I think that's where there makes that statement, sort of like, he's taking it personally, but there in verse 28, was it, "Oh God, that I might once be avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes." It was purpose that, they've taken my eyes, I'm going to, avenge it. It's like, sort of like they didn't do it righteously in taking his eyes. They did it deceptively. And he, it was sort of eye for an eye or tooth for a tooth type.
He would definitely, and he mentions that, again, I don't know whether that's, we're told not to avenge ourselves. And so I don't even know whether that's not the only place where he said that same sort of, I don't know whether the idea of him seeking to avenge himself personally is even something particularly commendable. He certainly mentions it, but it may be in the category of some of those other things that were less than ideal. Real quickly, we're just out of time. We're gonna wrap up Judges and be ready to start the book of Ruth next week, Lord willing. There's a couple of episodes that are mentioned in the last chapters of Judges. One is of a man named Micah who made idolatrous God and even had hired his own priest to serve in the capacity of worshiping these idols. His idols ended up being taken from him and but he's not one of the judges. He's just, his story is mentioned in chapter 17 and 18. And then in chapters 19, 20, and 21, it tells the story of a Levite who had a concubine. She had been unfaithful to him, but he went and brought her home. But on the way home, she is murdered. She's abused and murdered. And then he calls all Israel together to avenge her death. And they do that. We're going to skip those stories, but they're in the last chapters of Judges. A key verse here at the end of Judges is Judges 17, verse 6. And I think James already made reference to this verse tonight, but you might note that or underline it or highlight it in your text. Judges 17, 6. In those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did what was right in his own eyes. Well, that never works, right? That's a recipe for total chaos. But that's the way it was in Israel. Things were pretty bad in Israel as this period of time that we call the Judges goes on. Just one episode after another of horrible problems with the Israelites. But Lord willing, next week we will tackle the book of Ruth, which has got to be one of your favorite books of the Bible, isn't it? Really, the book of Ruth. It reads like a short story or a novel. It's wonderful. And so, Lord willing, next week we'll talk about Ruth. Thanks, everybody.